Well, this 2 episodes a day is just becoming habit, but I guess we're back in busy season with Parliament returning to the House of Commons. Well, not Prime Minister Mark Carney today, though, because he's at it again. He's gotten on the plane and hightailed it out of here. Another plane ride, another foreign handshake, another so called pivotal meeting. And that's why we got to talk about it this afternoon. Now, this time it's in Mexico City with President Claudia Sheinbaum. And of course, it comes with all the usual hype. The breathless headlines on CTV, the expensive entourages, and the claim that this will somehow strengthen Canada's trade economy as Donald Trump gets ready to reopen the Canada-US-Mexico agreement, better known as CUSMA, of course. So Mark flies off with the intention to show you as Canadians that he's doing his job and he's going to create a new and great trade agreement with Mexico on the side. But here's the truth. This trip, like almost every Carney trip so far, is another giant nothing burger, dressed up as a nation-building moment. Canadians are told to believe that this is pivotal. Just read the articles. Yet, when you strip away the staged photos and the fancy receptions, you realize this has absolutely almost no impact on your daily life. The numbers will prove it as we talk about them today. The logic will prove it. And worst of all, the timing proves it. Let's go.
Welcome to Bakes on Things.
Welcome back to Bakes on Things. I'm Chris Baker. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment down below to share your thoughts in our conversation. And of course, you can now hype this video as well. So let's start with the raw facts. CTV article I got this from last year. Canada did about $56 billion worth of trade with Mexico. Not small, sure, they are our third biggest trade partner, but when experts say that the most we could ever hope to add to that trade from this so-called diversification is maybe 1 to 5 billion more, let's put all of that into perspective, because that's less than a 10% growth on that trade, and that's less than a rounding error when you compare it to the 1.3 trillion with a T that we do with the United States. So here's the kicker. Most of that is Canada-Mexico trade physically moving through the United States as well. Railways, trucking routes, ports of entry, all of that running right through the partner you're trying to avoid. They all funnel across U.S. territory, which means that Mark Carney can drink as much tequila as he wants with Sheinbaum this week. But the reality is this. Unless Washington is on board with this additional trade and additional transit through their nation, nothing is going to change here. This trip is, once again, and always has been, window dressing. So think about it. You're told that Canada's economy is shrinking. We know this. GDP was down 1.6% over just one quarter. Tariffs are hammering steel, aluminum, autos. Jobs are bleeding out. We know that. And Carney's answer to all of this is a 36-hour jaunt to Mexico that might, if we're really lucky, boost trade by a couple of billions sometime down the road, as long as Trump Daddy says it's okay. That's like trying to put out a house fire with a garden hose. It just simply can't be done. So what is the real agenda behind this trip that is now costing taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars once again? And it's not just the trade math that stinks here. It's kind of all the math. Look at the itinerary itself. There are one-on-one meetings. Okay, I want you to really look at the itinerary. If you want to read this article, go read it. But a working lunch, a train terminal visit to watch Canadian wheat get offloaded from the train, a reception for business leaders. This is straight out of the political theater playbook, but just a really bad one. These aren't breakthroughs in any way. These are photo ops staged for Canadian media to broadcast back at home that Mark Carney is making some kind of progress here. Canadians are being sold the idea that every handshake with Sheinbaum is historic. Every meeting in all of these trips is progress. But ask yourself this. What tangible agreement has Carney ever come back with so far from any of these whirlwind trips since he's been prime minister? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. No binding trade frameworks, no tariff relief, no legal commitments. At best, he's signed agreements to talk more often, agreements to agree. And Canadians foot the bill for all of that. You have paid for these trips. If this Mexico trip ends the same way as all the others, and I'll bet you pretty surely that I'm going to give you 98% that it does, then taxpayers should demand Carney personally pay for the travel costs at this point. Because why should we shell out millions for him to go taste tequila and pose at a train station watching wheat be unloaded if the outcome is the same old we've agreed to keep talking about talking? And then there's an angle that's in this article, and I want you to take a look at it if you get a chance. Go to ctvnews.ca. I know we don't want to support mainstream media, but I want you to see the last paragraph, because buried in this article might be the actual answer to some kind of progress here. It's at the very end, almost like an afterthought, but it's the only thing that could actually matter from this trip. Duncan Wood, an actual expert on Mexican trade and supply chains, said something interesting in the article. If Carney and Scheinbaum want to show Washington that they're actually serious and maybe even get something done here, they need to align on China. Now, I know that probably makes Mark Carney pucker right up, but the reality is that's it. That's the ball game. That's the only thing that the U.S. actually would care about as it reopens CUSMA. Washington doesn't care if Canada sells a little more potash to Mexico. They could care less, other than the traffic through their own nation, or if Mexico sells a few more auto parts to us. They probably don't care. What Washington cares about is the geopolitical contest with China. They really care about that. They want to know, is Canada even on side? Is Mexico on side? Are we prepared to work together to reduce Chinese influence in North American supply chains? If we actually got something done around those discussions, if we actually aligned with Mexico, that would be the leverage point here. That's the expectation, or should be the expectation Canadians should have. That's the minimum outcome that we should probably demand from this trip, because additional trade to our third largest trading partner won't be significant enough to move any kind of needle. A consensus, a declaration, a joint policy with Mexico that says Canada and Mexico will align with the United States to confront China's growing economic and political footprint in North America would probably win the day here. It would be a fairly easy win for Mark Carney compared to the nothing burgers that have come from all of his previous trips. Because if Carney comes home without even that, then this trip has been a complete waste. So I want you to watch this trip closely as it plays out the rest of this week, because I have a feeling we're going to see the same old nothing we usually see. But let me explain why, because some of you will probably be asking this. Let me explain why the China piece is actually so important here. Because right now, China is embedded in global supply chains. They dominate things like critical minerals. They dominate electronics. They dominate rare earths. They dominate parts of the auto industry. And for what it's worth, both Canada and Mexico are quite vulnerable here. Mexico has Chinese investment in a lot of its manufacturing base. And then when you look at Canada, we know that Canada has flirted with Chinese companies in many ways, from building ferries in BC to auto parts as well, in mining and telecoms. It's basically across all industries. When Donald Trump sits down to renegotiate CUSMA, and he's going to do this from top to bottom, his team isn't going to care about whether Canada sold a few more wheat shipments to Mexico in any way. What he is going to care about is whether Chinese parts are still flowing through Mexican factories and ending up in North American vehicles. That's what he's going to truly care about when it comes down to whether we're stabbing America in the back in any way or not. They're going to care about whether Chinese-controlled critical minerals in Canada are feeding into the U.S. defense supply chain. And if that's the case, there's going to be a real problem in these negotiations. That is the real fight. And that is the fight that Carney seems completely unwilling to acknowledge publicly, because it's hard. And he doesn't like to do hard things. It's controversial, and he wants to stay away from that to keep his polling numbers up. And it actually requires leadership instead of photo ops, which he doesn't really know how to do. So, what should be our minimum expectation as Canadians from this? There's has to be one. Here it is. Here is the minimum expectation Canadians should demand out of this. If Mark Carney insists on jetting off around the world on taxpayer dollars, then at least bring home some results that actually matter, not agreements to do agreements or talking agreements to talk more. For Mexico, that means coming back with a joint stance on China. Not a handshake, not a photo op, not an agreement to agree, a real, tangible policy that we have alignment on, and maybe it includes alignment on China. If he can't even deliver that, then what really was the point of this trip to Mexico? Because boosting trade by 1 to 5 billion in a $2 trillion economy is pretty much meaningless. Watching wheat get offloaded from a train is absolutely meaningless, and holding a reception in Mexico City while Canadians are struggling to buy their groceries here is meaningless. The only thing that actually matters is whether Canada and Mexico can show Washington in some way that they're on the same page about something, about the single greatest geopolitical issue of our time, and that is the involvement of China. And if Carney won't do these things, then this entire trip is just another chapter in Mark Carney's latest book and growing record of international nothing burgers. And I wish he would write a book that is called International Nothing Burgers when he's done being prime minister, because it would be a great book. He's got a lot of content for that one. So here's the thing. Canadians, we need to ask ourselves a couple of questions here. Are you satisfied with paying for these trips that Mark Carney is taking if the result continues to be nothing? I mean, I think I know your answer, but are you happy watching Mark Carney rack up air miles and photo ops while our economy continues to shrink, while tariffs hammer our industries, while the inflation that we've experienced eats up your entire paycheck? Well, I'll tell you this, I'm not. I'm not at all. Canadians should not accept another dime spent on foreign trips unless these foreign trips and unless this prime minister can deliver real, measurable outcomes, not vague promises, not symbolic gestures, real results. And in Mexico, that means really just one thing and one thing only: alignment on China. There's nothing more to do on trade there. Maybe a billion here and a billion there, but in a $1 trillion economy means nothing. If he comes home without that, the China thing, then this trip has been nothing more than a tequila tour again, to watch wheat come off a train. And taxpayers should demand their money back. Because Canadians, well, Canadians are kind of sick of the photo ops. We don't need staged headlines. We need leadership. And right now, under Mark Carney, that's not something that we're getting at all. We'll catch you tomorrow.